Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. My name's Glenn Schrum. I'm director of the MFA Lighting Design program here at Parsons, and we're really excited that you could join us for tonight's program. Before we get started, I wanted to recognize a few people and companies. Specifically, I want to recognize our Parsons Lighting Design partners. This is a small group of lighting design firms and manufacturers and professional associations that help us to do all the things that we do here in support of our students and in support of the lighting design community. So this program wouldn't have happened without their support. And after the lecture, there'll be a reception where there'll be an opportunity for everybody to network. And in support of the current students and recent alumni knowing who the partners are, could I ask all the partners to stand up so that we can see those representing the partner firms? Great. I also wanted to thank our dean, Robert Kirkbride. He's not here tonight, but he's been a big supporter of the lighting design program and this event specifically. And our staff at the School for Constructed Environments, who've been really great in helping to make this happen. So, Darren, thank you. And Bethany, who's not here, and Heen, who helped and is now outside but working on another event. And the Designers Lighting Forum of New York, who helped to promote the event. It's great to have a good turnout in the middle of the week. And let me see. So before we get started for the full program, I want to introduce my fellow full-time lighting faculty member here at Parsons, Derek Porter. Derek's been working with the upper-level elective class, Light Space Art, and they completed a site-specific installation that's being introduced tonight, and you'll be able to see it on your way out. So I want Derek to provide a little more information on that.
Welcome, everybody. It's such a delight to have so many familiar faces back home. The Light Space Art elective course is a terrific class, and we've been running it for a number of years here. Effectively, what it is an elective course that mixes students from multiple schools and multiple disciplines across Parsons to examine the relationship between light, space, material, and ultimately human perception as the primary objective. So we spend the first part of the semester going through a series of exercises, looking at material and light dynamics, and then lecturing and researching perception effectively. So the focus with work of this genre, when we look at historical works and contemporary artists making this kind of work, is not so much on the aesthetics of the thing, but really how you situate a tool or an instrument or a condition in a manner that affects how humans see or what their response may be in conjunction with this. So we have an installation. I've got it diagrammed up here. It's not red, it's just there for your reference. It's on the interior of the staircase. So if I go to the next slide, this is an interior view. So if you came down the staircase to come into this lecture hall, when you go back up the stairs, turn right, you'll see this view, which is there's a staircase along the periphery of the building. So it's a subtle intervention. As I said, these works are site-specific, so we being myself and the students in the class, studied the conditions of the site and the stair and really looked at and focused on the nuances of interior-exterior, night and day, and the linear movement across the staircase specifically. And as you can probably imagine, those lighting nerds in the audience especially, the sensation and understanding of this work is going to change based upon time of day, weather conditions, and so on. So we invite you to go look at the piece while you're here and to come back multiple times to look at the piece. During the reception, I'm sure students and myself will be dragging a few people upstairs to look at it in more detail. So we invite that. I should also say that this is the high point, if you will, of the semester and the class. So building the installation in conjunction with the public event is the primary objective. So we've done this every year for the last few years, and also the work has at least tangentially an association to the content of the event as well. So hopefully you'll see that. So in conclusion, what I'll do is, these are the students involved with the class. I think everybody should be here, so can we have all the students stand up? So this again evidences students from across the different disciplines and across the schools of Parsons that have been a part of all this. So they've worked really hard over the last couple of weeks to physically manifest this into reality. So thank you very much. I'll turn this back over to Glenn.
Congratulations to Derek and the Light Space Art class.
In 1998, I was 23 years old, and I graduated as a lighting designer from art school in Finland. And I was invited to take part in a lighting workshop in an old ironworks in Germany called Wölklingen. The work we did as a part of the workshop is this big image there, so that was the site. And that was pretty impressive introduction to kind of architectural lighting and the scale and the context. But what really sort of blew my mind when I was there, and I carry this memory to this day, it was this. In that little town, they have this functioning ironworks. So every night, roughly every half an hour, every 20 minutes, they would pour molten steel into these open containers out in the open air, which would effectively light the entire city. And I really mean it. I mean, there would be this like a sun that was born every 20 minutes, and it would just go and just light everything. And I thought, coming from the media arts and dance theater lighting and that sort of thing, I thought, well, this is what urban lighting should be like. This is dynamic, this is emotional, this is memorable, And here I am talking about it 20 years later, so it really was memorable. It was the most spectacular urban lighting I've ever experienced since. So I kind of took that, and I still carry that feeling that this is what we should be doing. We should be creating urban environments that are experiential, emotional, and memorable. Around the same time, I was lucky enough to come across this book. You probably know it, at least the older members of the audience. It's a real classic from the 90s, Lou Michel. So in this book, he talked about this hierarchy of focal accents. And basically what this is from behavioral psychology, the involuntary movement of the eye. So where does your pupil sort of dart before your conscious mind tells your eye to look somewhere? And there's like a real order for it. It starts with people, but then it goes into movement, it goes into brightness, it goes into lighting vocabulary. And then he added that to do this must be added meaning and combinations. And this was the other moment that I thought, it makes perfect sense. Like, this is what lighting should be about. And I picked from there, particularly the movement and the meaning. And when the time came, roughly about 10 years later, to start my own practice, in 2009, I started a studio called Light Design Collective. We really took this to the heart. So we took this as a part of our approach very heavily, this idea that there's movement in everything, but in a conceptual level, but also in a very kind of pragmatic level. But movement is meaningless without context. So you have to drive a meaning for it. And this imagery that you see, these videos running here, this was our first project. As lighting designers, as architectural lighting designers, this is how we interpret it. So we started creating a content, basically. This was video content created to light a project. And everything here, every color, every pattern, everything here is driven by the project narrative, which in this case was kind of like a high-end clubby restaurant space. So these videos, these projections, these colors, these movements sort of found their way into the sushi bar, or they found their way into the VIP lounge wall. They would suddenly appear there, or they found their way into the background of the DJ as a high definition projection, and so on and so forth, all the way to a staircase, which would 8 o'clock in the evening wake up because the upstairs part, which is called the Dragon Lounge, would open 8 o'clock, so the dragon would wake up and start breathing molten lava down the staircase. So ever since I've been telling all the lighting students, this is how you light staircase. No one that I know of has fallen. No one has sued us, and it's the most Instagrammed staircase in Azerbaijan. But more importantly, what this sort of told us was that the movement has so much in it. It's such a rich concept. It's a lifelong study, and with, in a way, kind of simple interventions. I mean, there's a certain complexity to this, but still there's a certain kind of simplicity to these interventions, turns a humble architectural object to something else. So there's this transformative quality which is incredibly powerful. Now, from there, we just kind of went on a rampage of studying what we call natural movement of light. So all these photographs, these are real photographs of kind of analog projections, and mixing them always with real natural light. So we wanted to create tension. That was our concept. So you walk into a daylit space, there's a kind of abstract movement there. First you know, okay, it's a sunlight, it's cutting through the glazing, and it's cutting, and then in about 1 second you go, no, what's this? What is this? So once you have tension, you have attention. Once you have attention, you have reference point. When you have a reference point, people start talking about it. And then it becomes something else. So again, there's this transformation. And these can be very, very subtle, very, very simple. I see this as architectural lighting design, absolutely. Everything we do is architectural lighting design. We're lighting designers. We're not media designers. We're not artists. Or at least I'm not an artist. I work with some artists, but that's really the driver there, is that the transformation can happen. Now, from there, we quite quickly realized that we can't do this with kind of analog means, so we started experimenting more with digital things and kind of data integrations and all sorts of things like that, and came up with these type of things. This, for example, is the sky of Bilbao, the cloud formations live in Bilbao during an event based on live data information coming in. And because we also realized that the industry couldn't help us. So as lighting designers, we used to always kind of lean on the industry, like, hey, give me tools. Well, we did that. We went to, hey, give us tools to do, a digital interpretation of Bilbao sky live with a data integration. And they just looked at us and went, what are you talking about? So we ended up doing it ourselves, and we gave it a name. So we branded a part of our activity, which was this experimentation in the digital aspects of light. We branded it. We gave it a name. We called it Unstatic, and now it's its own company. It's just to show that the driver, the idea of movement and the idea of meaning, kind of took us to that sort of direction. And then we kept experimenting, and from there on, all these projects, we kind of call them prototypes. They're not sort of a ready thing. They're prototypes. They're sort of experiments. And this was an old oil tank. We punched holes onto it to give a very strong sense of time passing with the natural light, with the sun arc, and so on and so forth. We sort of stole as much as possible from real artists and used ideas like sensory deprivation to really heighten the senses of your surroundings and all sorts of things like that. And in the end, we ended up creating this sort of a very kind of modulating urban object. And what the lighting here is doing is basically, in this case, a swarm intelligence algorithm that has a lot of different sort of external responsiveness, like winds and things like this, simply to make sure that it doesn't repeat. And this was like maybe the first sort of a larger scale prototype for this idea that, you know, the light in almost any context can become an abstract communicator in a contextual sense. So these were the sort of the first steps towards what we now call ambient communication. That thing opened 2012 and it's been sort of doing its thing ever since. So it's also curious to think that when you introduce movement, and you have to understand that it's permanent, it's not a show. It doesn't start and it doesn't stop. It's not Greek theater. It doesn't have a sort of a line of intensity going up and down. It's something else. So you need to begin to sort of define what that something else is. So what is the movement of light in architectural context? Now from there on, we then went into this kind of a responsiveness idea that, okay, well, maybe it makes sense in certain situations that the human becomes the wind, the human becomes the abstractor. And also what's really interesting about digital light and human is that it is one of the sort of the softest and easiest way really to allow us to affect our surroundings. And more public the space is, the less the public is allowed to affect it. So if you're in a town square, what are you allowed to do to affect your surroundings? If I change the surroundings in a town square, it's basically called vandalism. What can I do? I can break something, I can make noise that somebody doesn't like, I can spray a wall. I'm not allowed to change anything. But the light component maybe could then be that. Now, the experimentations then went on to this kind of more commercial aspects, more complex. To me, this is light. This is lighting design. It has a very, very strong narrative behind it. It has a very strong purpose, a very strong meaning behind every intervention. And there is no scale as such. So you can scale this sort of thinking from a little display to a city. And now we're talking about hyperconnected planets, so you can scale it to a planet. Why not? Think big, yeah? So this was a competition entry that we famously lost in Dubai, although when we saw the winning thing, we thought we had won because it was a direct copy. But I'm not taking any sides here. So that sort of led us, all that development, actually, it wasn't so positive because it sort of caused crisis, identity crisis. So we had to explain to our clients, and to ourselves, well, who are we now? Because lighting design is always defined in such a kind of really siloed way, and super defined, specifically in the world of architecture. And we were doing that, and then we were doing this, and then we were doing that, and this and that, and then I would get excited about something else, so we'd do something else. And so we started sort of breaking it apart and analyzing it, really. And this was how we started explaining to our clients that we do this. It's like we bring together minds and ideas and skills, and we'll take you, Mr. Client, to our basement, literally. We'll take you to our basement, and we'll chain you up, and then a man with a gimp suit walks in, and a lot of post-it notes. So we started a process of defining in the beginning of the project what is it that should be done for the project, not defining what is it that we do. See what I mean? See the difference? So we basically got sick of bad briefs. So when you have a bad or boring brief for a project, you have a boring outcome. And a lot of our work until this moment were basically like Trojan horses. So we said to them, you're a lighting designer, yes. we want you to light the toilets to 100 lux and the table to the 500 lux, and we said, yeah, okay. And then we, put projections everywhere and exploding suns in the toilets, and we never, ever followed any briefs. And then we thought, well, this doesn't make any sense because they're not paying for us for what we're bringing. They're not paying for the added value. They like what we do, but they don't actually pay for it because they never asked for it. So that's where this came from. So let's write strong briefs. And the other thing that came out of this was this quite serious approach to research, because we also felt that this sort of a practice level application research is sort of severely missing in lighting practice. So we took our own stab at it and started kind of organizing ourselves around research.
What is thinking a tank? It's new. It's something that it's something that I was really looking forward to be quite honest. I'd seen the images of the building that's behind me, and I was fascinated by its inside and outside. That there's an obvious outside. It's quite raw. It's an old disused gas container, and it's been transformed into something absolutely magical inside. And I was waiting with anticipation to get inside it. I knew that there was going to be something very special inside it. So what's inside and what's special about thinking a tank is actually the ideas that then come through thinking in a tank. We've submerged ourselves for several hours with a group of disparate people from all over Europe today to discuss what is an incredibly important topic.
So we ran our own research event for 3 years, and literally in this extremely uncomfortable oil tank for like 8 hours, asking kind of oblique questions about future of light and human experience in it and all those sort of things like that, which then led us into another sort of identity crisis that again we're doing something that's really cool and really interesting and really applicable, but actually we can't package it up and no one's buying it. So we came up with another brand. So again, we gave it a name, we gave it a team, and we packaged it up, and we're calling it MAD Strategies, which obviously stands for Mandatory Advisory Discretionary Strategies. No one's ever been able to pronounce that. But it's been super successful. So what that means is that we bring in all the kind of co-design principles that are well documented and exist. We started creating our kind of own proprietary workshop models. Again, in one hand, to extract data from our own work, but also to allow, for example, the client side to really participate. Because usually they're actually sort of in this weird passive-aggressive position where they sort of control or think they control what's going on, but they don't really understand what's going on, and so on and so forth. So we try to really involve them. And we did these workshops, and the first thing we said, like, okay, thank you for the request for fee proposal. We would suggest not to look at it now. You give us a couple of grand and we'll set up this workshop and then we talk again. And they were like, what? And by the way, you have to have your CEO there, you have to have your marketing director there, you have to have your investment officer, have real decision makers, the real visionaries of the company, not the facility manager, not the project manager, preferably not the architect. This stays in this room. Definitely not the engineers. Well, you could have them all, but you need to have the top people. And suddenly it changed everything. Because the conversation was not about technicalities, it wasn't about lighting anymore. The conversation was about who are we, what's our image, what we're trying to achieve here, what are the larger goals, how do we express it, the proper design conversations, what the problems are, what should the design resolve here. So finally, we had the real dialogue, and out of that then came really interesting briefs. But there was one thing missing, and it was this. So all these years, we had been investing all the time quite heavily in-house for the kind of different methodologies and techniques to visualize these concepts. So again, the more complex it gets, the more open and ambitious the brief is, more difficult it is to explain and to understand. So I can't really go to the client and wave my hands and say, yeah, the birds and the wind and the this and the that and an LED on the wall, and then say, yeah, it'll be €1 million. You'll love it. You'll absolutely love it. It doesn't work. So we kind of went quite crazy about how to present and how to engage, and got into a lot of virtual reality techniques and technologies and build a whole team for it. And again, found ourselves in a situation that, well, this doesn't make any sense inside a lighting design studio because the client no one else is ever gonna be able to use it. So again, we branded it and we created like a spin-off. So out of this approach, as lighting designers, we're kind of sprouting these kind of multi-directional activities, but at the same time, in the name of light. It's all lighting design. I keep repeating this because it is super important to us. And more I see this kind of siloed conceptualization of what lighting design is and what they do, the more I think, as a group, as an industry, we're currently in the process of shooting ourselves in the foot, possibly in the knee, on the way to shooting ourselves in our heads, because we're opening up the added value creative possibilities for others. This is what all this comes from. So anyway, so now we have this brand called Revere that offers services to everybody, to architects, to other lighting designers, and can do incredibly sophisticated virtual reality experiences with light, where you can play and be creative, and you can change the lighting scenes, and you can really explore and understand and experience what it's all about. I'll show you one little video what it means then when all this sometimes comes together.
We're a group of artists, VR developers, software coders, and lighting designers.
Part of what makes us different is an understanding of the light, shadows, and colors.
The project is an art intervention for Tieto, a Finnish IT and software services company.
We were inspired by our client, the company Tieto, and its name, because Tieto means information.
I think data is beautiful, so we thought that would be great to get the data that Tieto creates to essentially create the environment for them. Tieto has created an intelligent services system for their campus. They have thousands of sensors. They collect a lot of very tangible, very interesting functional data from their office. Our job was to take that data and visualize it and bring it into this immersive art piece.
From the data that Tieto is gathering, we can have a sense of how the building behaves, how it moves, how it changes throughout the time. And that is represented real time in the data, in the art installation.
It starts from the journey when you come into the building and you start to tell that what Tieto is all about. So I think that we start from the data, which can be illustrated very beautifully here, and then the journey continues.
Essentially, it's a cyber-physical space. It's an environment where the digital information, the digital world, flows through into built environment. In the meeting room corridors, the data flows through to special downlights where the beam width is responding to the data visualization, as well as the tonality of the fixture. It creates this sort of connection to the entrance area, and again, quite dynamic environment to be in. We wanted the visitors to be able to access the data also in a more tangible way. So we put in very large scale OLED touchscreen. It's transparent, so it kind of keeps you within the space. You see the data visualizations flowing through it, and when you touch it, you're affecting your surroundings. There's a lot of very new technology in this project. It's quite experimental. For a project like this, you need a strong client, and we really had that here. That kind of led into this idea of what we now call ourselves. This company is called Dynamic Environments Group, and it's an open-ended idea. So now there's these sorts of logos and service proposals and skills and concepts, but maybe in 2 years' time there's another 10. But all this is lighting design. We never veered off from that main principle. And we're calling it antidisciplinary because it's not really sort of different disciplines coming together and working together. It's freer than that. It's more open than that. And this guy, Joe Ito, describes it very elegantly. So interdisciplinary work is when people from different disciplines work together. Antidisciplinary is something very different. It's about working in spaces that simply do not fit into any existing discipline. A lot of our work doesn't quite fit into the existing concept of lighting design practice, but we insist that that's exactly what we're doing. We are doing lighting design services. Now, this approach has changed quite dramatically a lot of things, like our contracts, like our PI insurance, like the way we recruit, from where we recruit, and so on and so forth. And I think it continues to do so, and it's getting closer to, actually, funnily enough, paradoxically, we're getting closer to a standard design office, like a normal design office. You know, Frog or IDEO, or design companies. Well, that's what they do. They're not so siloed. They're design companies. They resolve design problems. Client comes with a problem, they come with an answer. So I think there's a lot there, and this is early days, and this is just one angle to this topic, but I think there's a lot there to be explored, because particularly now, we're going through this, and I hope this is coming to an end now, but we're still in this kind of an age of hyper-specialization. So you specialize to do that little one thing, to sort of, and then once you create a lot of these vertical silos of everybody being super specialist, there comes a startup from Silicon Valley and just crashes everything horizontally because they offer something that makes more sense. And I'm afraid that because of it, we should kind of ask ourselves right now, is lighting design actually already a commodity? Because since 1998, I've been working professionally as a lighting designer. I have seen firsthand the fee levels, for example, going down, not up, down. So the same London-based well-known lighting design practices that would do the 5-star hotel in Middle East for X amount of money in 2001 are now doing it roughly about 30 to 50% less. Why? Because the client is getting very similar, seemingly very similar services from all sorts of different directions. So the service itself, the concept of itself, is on its way, or already is, being commoditized. And that's a bit of an issue. And we need to be able to answer that. And I think, well, I believe that the creativity is actually the answer. Now, just to kind of underline a little bit these points. Now, if you go to LinkedIn and do very super high-level research activities like this one, which took me about 10 minutes. So you type in lighting design into LinkedIn, you get 700,000 hits. You then narrow it down to, areas of light design that might be a bit more relevant to us, and you're still at 264,000 people are lighting designers. You narrow it even more, you go into architecture and planning, and you get about 100,000, I believe. Let's see. Yeah. A little more than 100,000 people are doing architectural lighting design. How many do you know? 100. You know 100. Me too. I know maybe 200, but there's 100,000 of them. Who are they? Now, if we keep going and try to kind of find us in this amazingly scientific diagram, well, my rough guess is that us is about 10,000. So we're basically this tiny little dot in this ocean, and we're kind of trapped in the middle. So there's an argument that says that innovation always happens in the edges. That's why this whole startup culture has taken place. That's why they've been so successful. And from the edges comes incredibly disruptive ideas. I think as a profession, we're risking our position right now because I think we're kind of in the middle. We're on a kind of a tiny little island. We think we're incredibly important. We do all the cool lighting design, where in reality we do maybe 3% of the projects. And this 150,000 people in LinkedIn do the rest. Okay? Who are they? And why on earth would the client not go to them? And in fact, clearly they already are. Okay? We're doing 3%, they're doing 97%. So, what if we try to do this? What if we try to position us, that little dot, to the edge? And start leading this process, start leading the innovation, and that way avoid this commoditization effect, because simply you're not offering the services that the 97% are. So you're not in a competition with them. You're also not following the industry when it comes to innovation, which is unfortunately currently totally the situation, is that they have the R&D budgets, they do the R&D, they come up with innovation, they introduce it to you, you then introduce it to your client. To me, that's really eating away value, massively. Now, but why, you might ask? Why do we have to do this? I have a nice job, I have a good salary, we got 50 people working for us, everything is fine. Yes, and that sort of elite level will probably exist for a long time, but I think it's shrinking. At which point we, as a profession, all of us need to kind of ask right now, what is it that you could do that algorithm can't? Because when you break down your consultancy services to very, very narrow bands and sort of fight for that space, you're all the time risking that that can be partially or fully actually automated. Now, if you go to the net right now, you can find a very useful site where you can buy, I think it says $27 will teach you how to light a shop. $27. You have to take this seriously because this is what the client sees, okay? So the client sees, I can get somebody who's done a course, they can light the shop, they'll cost me nothing, and you cost 15,000. Why is that? Where is the value? How would they be able to perceive it? So, because a lot of lighting design, and let's face it, if you go through the award booklets from 1992 onwards, it seems that every year the same project wins. So there's a lot of rules, there's a lot of formulas. It's very formulaic. It's this, exactly this. How difficult would it be to actually automate this? I don't think it's that difficult. Now, if somebody wants to do it is another question. But I think we should take this relatively seriously, because if we sell that service, we're on our way to difficult times. So, and I also think that there's a risk that it basically leads to creative complacency. So you feel that you don't really need to be creative because nobody's asking you to. They're asking you a consultancy service, and that's enough, and they pay for it. But I think that's exactly the final last value, added value position that we can possibly have, is the creativity. So if we're sort of hanging there and we're in this small little circle in a highly defined way, I think it's a risk, whereas we have a possibility to do this. Line design can be incredibly open-ended profession, incredibly open-ended, particularly right now. And what's even more interesting is that if you go slightly anti-disciplinary about it, you find that it's actually those intersections, those edges, where all the really super interesting stuff happens. Who invented video mapping? Was it a lighting designer? No. It was a bunch of VJs. What's the coolest new lighting approach in the world? Video mapping. See what I mean? It comes from the edges, those little things. Now, there's nothing to stop us to be that. We can be the next VJs, but I think we do need to kind of open this package up, particularly because we're leading into this right now. So, world is, on its way to actually realizing the vision of hyperconnected society. Hyperconnected society obviously has in its kind of, as its base, IoT. And everybody's talking about IoT and nobody knows what it even means. So IoT was defined in the 90s by a British researcher, Kevin Ashton, like this. And I think it's quite a beautiful way of saying that, you empower computers with their own means of gathering information so they can see, hear, and smell the world for themselves in all its random glory. Now, this vision, 20 years later, is now being built. It's happening. And everybody tends to agree that it is happening. And what it actually means is that we're creating a global, immersive, invisible, ambient, networked computing environment where we all live. We're all part of this. And if you're not quite sure if this is true, in 2008 was the first year when the number of connected devices on this planet exceeded the number of humans. In 2 years' time, it's going to look something like this. So we're looking to have about 50 billion connected devices versus 7.5 billion humans. Why is that interesting? Why is that important for line designers? Because that means that that technology is coming in. It's coming to the built environment. It's not going to just stay in your pocket anymore. So who will design it? Who will curate it? Who will decide what does it do? And what's the world that results to? So is architecture becoming some kind of a tripod for technology? I think line designers are incredibly well positioned to take that role and really create an absolutely new value proposition. As I said before, everybody tends to agree that the hyperconnected society is indeed coming. When? Well, a lot of opinions about that. And how does it look like? Now, do we want to live in some kind of a dystopian concept of information everywhere that's demanding our attention, or can we come up with other principles and other concepts? No. About 2 years ago, we got invited into a research consortium. It was a European Horizon 2020 backed a research project. It was called the Naked Approach. Very Finnish. And the naked approach means that technology will recede. So right now we have these computers in our pockets that we're using to access digital services. The next step is the wearable, so the computer is here and everywhere, and they all keep beeping and they all keep telling that you got an email. But after that, the concept is that they actually jump away from your body. So you're naked from technology. You don't need to carry it, and it's called nearables. So our research package that we're the leaders of, it was called nearables. And we've spent 2 years now developing technologies and concepts for this, where the goal was to make the light the interface to digital world. So lighting design actually becomes a major component of hyperconnected societies in a hopefully incredibly positive way. And not the sort of a dystopian principle where Amazon is sort of serving down digital services for all of us to consume and nobody can say anything about it, but actually make us an active part of this rather than a passive consumer. As a diagram, it looks something like this. So the cyber-physical space principle is that you begin to create like what's called cybernetic loops. So the digital services are available to you in a very subtle way. The environment is connected to the context. When something happens or changes in the context, it changes the environment, which then affects the data collected, which then affects the environment and changes it again, and so it goes. So you begin to have this sort of responsive, actually very natural feeling environments where light can be very much the modulator. So as we tend to do, when this research kind of really took off, and we very quickly realized that this concept or this product cannot exist within a frame of a design company, we spun off a startup. You're now counting and you're like, what the hell? Actually, there's like 10 of me, in the world. I found the multiplying machine. No, so this is actually what takes my time right now. So the design studio is doing its own thing. It's over 20 people, and they don't need me. I am now focused on this. So we're now bringing this idea of ambient communication into the world. So, and that's what Scandal Technologies were created for. So to try to explain the ambient communication in through a couple of examples, a lot of this is intuitive. So a lot of this you already know. So we're trying to, in a way, systemize it and create enabling technologies to allow these kind of concepts to be easy to deploy. So what we know from the behavioral science, as mentioned before, is like, the involuntary movement of the eye. You create contrast, you create movement, that will create a focal point in the space, and which immediately helps, for example, crowds to navigate. So suddenly you have dynamic wayfinding where you affect behaviors. Now, in this case, for example, you would arrive to a metro platform, and I'm there with my phone, I'm reading my emails, that's my attentive processing going on there. And at the same time, in the corner of my own peripheral vision, I see something's happening on the right-hand side. A zone is going blue, they're going to blue blobs. So I'll just navigate where those blue blobs are without having to think about it at all. I'll stand there. When the train arrives, we have people density sensors inside the train carriages. The train sends a data stream to the next platform, and the blue carriages are the ones that have most space. So people jump in, people jump out, happy days. The whole process is relatively easy. Now, why does this matter? Well, we're talking that this whole example comes from one of the biggest rail operators in UK. And they told us that if we could improve between 3 to 5% that process of people distributing on a platform, 3 to 5% better, that could yield a saving of £50 million for them, because they can take a train out of circulation. They're currently running overstocks. Everybody's complaining the trains are full, too full, overcrowded. They're not. People just not using the platform correctly. Now, they tried all sorts of ways to resolve this. Video screens and somebody shouting to the microphone, move down to the platform. No one does. We're not working, we don't function like that. But what we can, we're quite receptive to suggestion. So ambient communication tries to be suggestive technology. And again, we're not telling you what to do. We're suggesting, and 3 to 5% might, take the suggestion. And happy days, they save a lot of money. Another idea is that ambient communication is for something more instrumental. So in this case, the client needs to get 120,000 people literally every day in an orderly queue, moving in a certain speed. So how do you get a crowd to kind of maintain a particular speed? And that speed is variable. So it's linked to the movement of this particular wheel, it's linked to the wind speeds and the wind loadings on it, and so on and so forth. So the principle here is that the environment suggests a speed. So there's no information there that you need to read. because that's a cognitive process that stops you. There's nothing you need to pay attention to. You just sense it, the same way you sense a river flowing, or you sense a cloud moving, or you sense a car going by. You just sense a speed, and maybe 30 to 40% of the people will be affected by it, and the whole process becomes a little bit more smoother and straightforward. And it's based on this. And again, you know this. So we have this unbelievable ability to process massive amounts of information in any given moment, which is entirely non-linguistic, non-cultural, very, very human, entirely a part of our built-in biological, physiological system, and it doesn't exhaust us. And it's based on peripheral vision, and more precisely, pre-attentive processing. So attentive processing is the bit that you're doing right now. It's the smaller part of the brain, it's short-term memory, it's absolutely exhausting. It's the reason why you go home like this, because you've been demanded, that little brain here is under constant attack, which also means that tomorrow when you wake up, you would have forgotten roughly about 99.9% of what I said today, which is absolutely human. It's not only me, but it's just how we are. But at the same time, you will remember tomorrow the lighting here, the acoustic, the condition, how many people were roughly, all this sort of peripheral, ambiental information that we all just get in very fast. It's 200 degrees of our field of vision is for that, and it's a very different part of the brain that processes it. And things that can be designed for it, I've listed a few words there. I mean, there are more, but things like hue, intensity, flicker, directional light, motion, this is lighting terminology. So that means that you as a light designer can design for peripheral vision. You can provide suggestive information through it in a very knowing way. So in other words, a massive opportunity to explore where lighting design could go. Now, so this is what we've been researching, developing. We have a software team. We have 8 people working on this. We're coming out of R&D right now. We're in a pre-release mode right now, and we created a system, and we're calling it Poet. And because world needs poetry. So we don't want, and I'm sure I'm with peers here in a sense that we don't want the others to control the visual environments with digital information where they are focusing on your attentive processing. They'll be servicing you, they'll be selling you services, they'll be doing this, they'll be doing that. They'll be creating a horrible world to be in. Whereas us as line designers, we have decades of experience of modulating the spaces in a suggestive way, reflecting the architecture, reflecting volumes, understanding use, and all sorts of things like that. So that is a real opportunity. So what we've created is basically a workflow, is a design tool, is a software where you can conceptualize, you can present to your client, but at the same time you program. You program, not a programmer. Not you telling somebody to program, you program it. Damn it. So it's important we take the authority, because that's another added value. So if we're always the consultant who tell, I've talked to him. No, you take control, you modulate the environment. And the way this works is that you create contextual inputs very easily. So you can use sensors, you can use 3D cameras, you can use even a BMS system can send you a model. You can take weather information, traffic information, whatever makes sense in a particular space for a particular project, for a particular client. That becomes an input. That triggers something. And it's incredibly rich. So there's enormous amounts of inputs that could come. So from here right now, we could take the level of CO2 in the air, and the lighting condition would change. We could get a suggestion of time passing. We could get an idea that the drinks are going to be served in 5 minutes, so you could anticipate. You could do all sorts of things. So it's really just about the imagination. You then go into concept creation, content creation. Now this famously has always been a nightmare with all sorts of stupid video loops and repeating things like that don't belong to architecture. So instead, you work with processing. You work with techniques that allows you to sort of explore, play around, find out things, and very, very, very quickly generate a new kind of environment, new kind of light, new kind of content that never, ever repeats. Because what we know from our studies into movement of light and the behavioral sciences and all the rest of it backs it up is that when we perceive a pattern that repeats, we lose interest. We get bored. So it goes like, first you lose interest, then you get bored, then you get annoyed, and actually it can be used as a form of torture, which is pretty much all the lighting control systems in the world. So they loop, and they just loop forever. It's really, really bad for us. So this is the principle behind this. Now, then you have also different parameters that you can then link to those inputs. So the speed of the movement can be linked to the speed of the wind outside, or the color can be the temperature, or the color could be the amount of people in the space, or anything else, or all these camera inputs and so on and so forth. So very, very quickly, you create an environment like where these downlights have a purpose, have a meaning. And when they do something, they do it because they try to somehow improve and modulate this environment based on its current use. You have dimming behaviors, you do all sorts of things. It's not limited to some kind of media installations. It's about light. You create different kinds of layouts, you map your lights, you can get 2 million lights out of the one system thanks to the graphic processing capabilities of the new computers. You put layouts on top of each other. So again, you have incredibly rich opportunities of laying and relaying ambient communication into environments. And then finally, you can link it to virtual reality spaces, which allows your client to actually understand what on earth it is that you're talking about. You probably understand why I need this. So we think that what we have created here is an interesting step for answering those kind of diminishing value propositions of lighting design. Again, this is lighting design to us. It's not media design. It's not art. It's not show. It's architectural lighting design, but it's architectural lighting design trying to stay ahead of the curve to be ready for this hyperconnected society, implementations through IoT and everything else. We want to be there first, and we want to be the authors who modulate these environments. And just as a little glimpse, we're in a process of implementing things like emotion detection. So if you smile, the lights change. If you're really depressed, they change. So it's called, what is it called? Artificial empathy. So you can create environments that actually have empathy, or that seemingly have empathy. A little bit like the Hitchhiker's Guide to Galaxy. You know, the lifts are always depressed. When the doors open, they go, oh. And you go, lift up, and the lift goes, may I suggest down? So it's a bit like that, but more positive. And then, of course, all sorts of 3D sensing and all the rest of it. So the attitude in this system is that it is a platform, and it's all about just conceptualization. The integration can be done. So if you need a particular kind of sensor or particular kind of a data set to come through to act as a trigger, it will be integrated. And in the end, it looks like a little bit like this. So I'm not doing a product demo here. So it is just to show the whole curve, that what sort of started off as a study into natural movement of light and this sort of a fascination between movement and meaning, we're sort of half accidentally stumbled into even a system development in the end. And the company looks very different now than it did when it was started. Thank you.
Thank you, Tapio. Does anyone have any questions? I have an extra mic we can pass around. Can I get you? And if not, I'll start. Thanks very much. I think there's so many things that you raise, questions that you raise, and provocations about the future in every way. One very strong interest of mine is natural light. And it's interesting to me that that's where you started in looking at this idea of movement. But I wonder if you have any thoughts about the role that natural light may play in a world that has more lighting as a source of ambient communication that is orchestrated by the designer and the interaction of those two elements.
No, that's the original ambient communicator. And that's the ambient communication that we're exposed to constantly, and we use it a lot. So we're absolutely intrinsically aware of passing of time and all those sort of things, thanks to the natural light. Now, I think there's amazing and interesting opportunity there to then start taking it to the next kind of level, is that how you would, for example, introduce digital layer to natural light, which of course you can, even by, as long as you have a glass surface that is pixelated and the sunlight comes through it, and what's on the other side is actually then digitized. So digital sunlight. Yeah, that's a good idea. So why not? But I think what's behind a lot of this is actually trying to be quite, in a way, clever about it, that, what would people accept? It's also about acceptance. So this is why I'm really worried about this sort of a dystopian doomsday scenarios of the environments becoming artificial in a way that they feel artificial. And I think there will be a massive rejection towards it. And this hyperconnected society, these digital services, which we now depend on, absolutely, we depend on them. If they start kind of like really intruding into every aspect of our lives, I don't think the reaction is going to be particularly positive. So hence why we're trying to go a bit Nordic about it and allow that digital thing to be here, not here, and be subtle about it, and therefore seek acceptance. And more natural it can feel, the more likely it's to be accepted, I think.
Hi, I'm Thomas. Thank you so much for the talk. I think this is absolutely amazing because I've been I graduated 2 years ago, and I've had like a small input in the New York lighting design industry. And I think this is so much different and ahead what like the market is actually demanding right now. My question is, as the market is saturating more and more, this is just a natural process, right? So do you see any other inspiration from other markets? Like, for example, the printing press was something super innovative hundreds of years ago, or fashion or music, it's now everywhere around. Is there any other inspiration from the industry that you see, okay, this worked in this category, how can we imply and implement it in the lighting design industry?
I think maybe the strongest one right now, with that industry has woken up to as well a little bit, is SaaS, the software as a service. So a few years ago, practically all the big software houses went into that model, which pretty much killed pirate software. Now, lighting as a service has been sort of dabbled in, and some manufacturers are playing with it. But I think there's a lot there, a lot of opportunity there. And even us as designers, like part of this platform principle here is that we can continue to provide our services to the project. So you become a content designer. So lighting design as a service, as a sort of like a monthly subscription to lighting design. I think that's an interesting example, an interesting kind of inspiration, and it certainly has worked. I mean, the SaaS principle has exploded. I mean, it's enormous industry right now.
Thank you very much. This was really fascinating. But is it something that you are thinking about for all space types, or is it something that you're gearing towards more public spaces, or do you see an application in every every space that we might find ourselves in?
In principle, because it's part of the much bigger picture, this hyperconnected idea, the hyperconnectedness, I think, will seep into every aspect of our lives, which means practically every space. So being a transport or a museum or your home, it's very easy to see how that will enter. So with it, why not? Why not bring the principles of ambient communication and intelligent lighting with it? So I don't see limitations. I think, of course, it's incredibly early days. It's quite pioneering, and it kind of requires a certain type of client to be ready to pilot these sort of things. So I think it will maybe start in a more slightly high-end sort of semi-public projects like, a five-star hotel or maybe a new cool airport or a new headquarters for somebody. So I think there'll be that. Those would maybe be the early adopters, and this is exactly in that sort of a curvature. So we're here. So we're coming out of the innovation period, the R&D, and now we're looking for the early adopters that will do the pilots, and then eventually it'll start get adopted. But who knows how this will pan out? But hence why I think it would be pretty interesting, in my opinion, if the lighting design fraternity would take the authority on this topic.
Thank you very much. As I watch all of this and I hear you speak of all of this, the primary driving factors behind collecting this data, and it's sort of, it has to do with sensors either locally positioned somewhere in a space, or sensors elsewhere, and the data is then collected. I'm curious, what you think about hacking.
Yep.
So in this kind of in these types of environments that you're describing, if someone were to mess with them in a particular way, particularly if they are in our periphery, driving us and our behaviors, whether we're aware of it or not, that could be potentially disastrous.
Or super fun. I wish light had that power to kind of like tell us what to do, but it doesn't quite have it. It's suggestive, but it is a very good point, because the other one is, of course, privacy, data privacy, GDPR, all these kind of things. Now, the good news in that is that obviously us or any lighting company or anything else, we don't need to do that technology, because there's such a massive demand and a necessity for things like network security. And there's this constant basically race between Cisco against hackers, and the theory is that all the hackers work for Cisco. So I think it is there, and yes, more connected we get, the more opportunities there will be for that. And the same argument goes for, self-driving cars, and if they're all connected, then presumably somebody could press a button somewhere central and just like paralyze all the cars, because now they're connected. Currently, you can't do that. But because it's such a big story, I'm taking a view right now is that somebody else's fish to fry. And I will trust, foolishly, I will trust Cisco to figure that one out.
So you don't think that it would be? Thank you. You don't think that would be something that the lighting designer would then be to a certain degree not completely, but to a certain degree, responsible for in
Exposed
terms
to.
of
Maybe.
specification. So say,
Yeah.
you as a lighting designer, you have created a lighting scheme for this space. Do you see in the future in this sort of type of lighting design that falling under the purview of the lighting designer?
Maybe, and it's a very interesting. Yeah, I mean, how it affects our professional standing. What sort of skill sets do we need? What sort of insurances do we need? Do our professional indemnity insurance cover? Yeah, absolutely. But the thing here is that there is no avoiding the lighting becoming part of networks. So if we somehow need to assume a level of responsibility for the functioning of the network or not is probably the question here. My guess is that it's maybe not going to land on us too much, simply because that same network would be used for so many other things, which also then invites this pondering on how much of those other things we should be doing. So I just had a sessions in Singapore a week and a half ago where somebody has started a company called Internet of Lighting or Lighting of Things or something. But it's based on this kind of idea that you map out your IoT providers. So right now you're specifying Erco and Igusini and na. But next thing you is like, okay, now I need to be able to specify the sensors and the network and the this and that and so you become an author of the whole network potentially, which would be a massive added value, which would then earn you much higher fees. Lighting designers are terrible business people. I'm learning slowly there. Slowly, very slowly. Is it time for drinks?
Soon. Thank you. Really compelling content that you shared with us, and I think a timely conversation in the industry. Well needed. So thank you. So I've got a practical question, and I'm probably revealing my age and the Ludditeness in my thinking through the process. As tantalizing as this is and compelling intellectually, I can only imagine technical problems and frustrations and the layers of practical issues dealing with contractors, trying to communicate how to install and implement in addition to convincing clients, which you've done a beautiful job in creating systems to communicate intent. But I'm thinking about the logistics beyond the kind of idea of this, and just the fact that there are layers of sensors and technologies that run this, and there have to be problems. So we don't need to get into the weeds of the kind of broader intellectual, implications of this, but I'm just wondering, anecdotally, with your own experience with doing some of these installations, this intervention-based work, what are real challenges that you've contended with in executing this? Can you give us, a couple of examples, for example, and how you've learned from that and how that's advanced the thinking or changed the thinking, subsequently?
Yeah, it's incredibly important point. We took the attitude that not only that we need to be able to conceptualize this, present them well enough for somebody to say, yes, we do need to be able to execute them. And again, it is tough because the industry is not quite ready for it. So a lot of this is experimental work done by us. Hence, things like the software. In a lot of these projects, the software is kind of a prototype. So it's buggy, it does this one day and then something else the next. Then you need to go back and fix it. So you do end up assuming enormous amount of risks, but then again, that's pioneering. And you have to be just kind of ready somehow mentally for it. So we have had a ton of problems particularly with the software aspects of it. When the systems get more complex, you then struggle more with the installers, and you need to actually then look for those installers even before, so you specify the installer, basically. You specify a contractor. So it changes the scope. And still there are issues. Suddenly, we have a project right now where suddenly, there's harmonics screwing up all the data flow, like electricity harmonics. Like what? Where did that come from? But again, a lot of our own development, particularly this POET system, is almost like a distillation of frustration. So it tries to cut down the amount of things that can possibly go wrong, all the way down to the drivers and the network equipment and the number of them, everything really, which makes a leaner, meaner, cheaper system easier to execute and easy to monitor. Enormous focus on remote access. We have a server that has 2 SIM cards, not 1. 2 if one breaks. And then it has it's a Wi-Fi port, and it has a wire connection to the internet. So there's like 4 ways of accessing it. And all this comes from IoT, because right now, for example, the computers that we're using are the computers developed for robotics. So artificial intelligence applications for robotics. And those devices are like, they operate in minus 20 degrees to plus 70. There's no moving parts. It's like a lump of metal, this kind of thing. So we're riding the wave of the other industries who have these same problems. So my very optimistic view on that is that we are now having those problems. We've been having those problems for the last 20 years because the tools are poor. They are this sort of a slightly chaotically sort of repurposed theater industry tools that have been somehow kind of whacked into the built environment. Whereas first time ever, there's now been tools built for this purpose, so therefore the process itself becomes easier. So a great example always for this is like, how long ago was it when Photoshop came? Photoshop 1.0, 96, something like that. Incredible photo manipulation tool that not many people ever learn how to use really properly. Well, then comes Instagram. Instagram does basically professional level photoshopping very intuitively. So my mum uses it. And this is the kind of the thing that I hope will happen, is that right now we are in this kind of like Photoshop 4.2 that you need to be a space engineer to be able to figure it out, hence all the problems. But the next step is that actually it becomes just like, and it works. Instagram for lighting. There's a good idea there.
We have time for one more question.
So thank you, of course. It really was a dynamic presentation. And in general, it is exciting to see all of the applications that artificial intelligence is enabling us to have. But with that, because you're talking about behavior enhancement and you're talking about behavior modification on a biological level, what kind of responsibilities do you think that carries?
Well, it's influencing. So again, the thing we have to all the time keep in mind is that there's like, light has a great power to do things, but it also has huge weaknesses. So when you move to the periphery, it's incredibly limited what you really can do. So again, it is suggestive. So it's not a concept or technology that would have a power to really manipulate masses. I mean, if it did, I would be doing this talk in Beijing right now. They pay really well. So you see what I mean? Is that there is like inherent subtlety to it, which I love, because it kind of like shackles Google and Amazon and everybody else who wants to service us, these digital services in our built environment, like crazy, because there's so much they can't do. So in that sense, I don't really perceive a massive, like a moral risk in that sense. If I turn this place right now really, really quickly to blue, nobody's gonna get hurt. See what I mean? The whole kind of melatonin, serotonin conversation that's going on, the latest I heard that there's an ability to maybe to get 30% difference on your melatonin level if you do something. So we're talking very subtle effects. And in any case, I'm more interested of dopamine than melatonin.
Okay, that's a perfect way to end. Thank you very much.
Thanks.